Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Stephen King Cast, one man's musings on the works of Stephen King. Each week, I will review one entry in the bibliography of Stephen King in the chronological order of publication. And in this week, I turn my attention to Stephen King's latest novel,
The Institute. So I apologize that it's been so long. The book itself came out in September, and now it is late October. I finished it a while ago. I just have not had a chance to get to my review, and I found myself with a couple hours on my hands this morning on this beautiful Sunday in October. As I record this, the leaves are at peak foliage. The sun is shining brightly, and the rest of my day will be comprised of me fighting with my pool because I haven't closed my pool yet. So please wish me luck. It was stupid on my part to wait this long. I just got all of the leaves out of it. The water is icy, and when I disassemble all of the equipment, I'm sure I won't be able to feel my fingers anymore. So don't know why I felt like sharing that with you, but hey, there you go. That's what you get on a Sunday morning on the Stephen King Cast, or whenever you're listening to it. So before I get to my review of The Institute, I want to read some listener emails that have been piling up in my mailbox, so I do apologize. So I'm going to start with Josh, who writes, Dear Stephen King Cast, I'm writing to say wow. I've just stumbled across your podcast, and what a gem it is. I've been spending the summer making my way through King's works and was looking for a podcast or series to complement it, and I cannot stress how perfect your series is for this. The analysis and structure is always perfect and pertinent. Although I've only recently started listening, I learn something new each episode. I'm currently listening to your fantastic analysis of The Dead Zone, a book which personally I felt a little insubstantial and just had to write to tell you how much I love your podcast, and I thank you so much for being one of the few series delivering this kind of material. But one thing, I am shocked that you didn't like Cujo. It's one of my favorites, and I was a little disheartened that you felt uncomfortable reading it. I found it such a page turner and even a little optimistic. However, your analysis was insightful as ever and provided me with great trivia. So thank you so much, and I hope you continue to enjoy your work. Josh, a constant reader. Josh, thank you for writing in. And it's funny that you mentioned Cujo. Of all of the episodes that I've ever done, I get a lot of feedback on my Cujo episode because a lot of people are like you say, just shocked that I didn't like it. And it's not that I didn't like it. I did like it. I do want to go on the air, or I don't know. I need to listen to my review. Maybe I straight up said that I didn't like it. I did think it was ugly. I thought it was an ugly book. I just it's interesting how that kind of sticks out there. But thank you, Josh, for writing in. And up next we have Bryant, longtime listener, who writes, Hi, just wanted to drop a line and say how great your tribute to your late lamented Pooch was. If you'd gotten to the end of it and said, you know what, no review today, that had been fine by me. Podcasts that work primarily because of the personality of the host, so for me, that was 100% on topic. Was a tear or two to be seen escaping my eyes while I heard on my way to work on Saturday? Why, yes. Yes, indeed they were. Speaking of rolling tears, if you don't cover the various lock and key one-shots, including the Weeper Open the Moon, which is awesome, I might have to roll a few more. Bryant, thank you for your kind words. Listeners, you'll know, longtime listeners will know that I normally am joined by my furry co-hosts. Unfortunately, I had to put one of my furry co-hosts down this past summer, and I mentioned it on the show. So for anyone that wrote in, there was a lot of outpouring. I really appreciate it, and that's what Bryant is discussing. As we speak, my other furry co-host, you might hear her licking herself to an obscene amount below the table, but she is here in body and in spirit. In terms of Lock and Key, I don't know what I'm going to do next with Lock and Key. I have not read the one-shots. And now that Joe Hill and Gabriel Rodriguez during San Diego Comic-Con announced that there was going to be new Lock and Key material, and now that we have the show coming out soon, I think that it is time for me to probably start going back into the house and start reading some of those one shots to kind of get caught up. Up next, We have Marianne, another longtime listener who writes, Dear Constant Reader, I'm so sorry to hear about Sunny. What a loss for you and your family. I have lost a few beloved pets in my time. It's heart-wrenching and a true grief. They are your family members and a part of your daily life. I heard it in your voice and I heard it in your speech. I felt your pain. He was obviously such a loved little guy. While I'm emailing, I'll also let you know that my husband and I made a trip over to the States from Scotland in the spring. I've been busy preparing for and exhibiting since then, and we went to the Stephen King tour in Bangor, Maine. It was a fantastic experience, and I can't thank you enough for your recommendation. I've been meaning to email you about it for ages. Stu was so full of interesting Stephen King facts, and seeing various landmarks and understanding a bit more about the history and geography of the place in Stephen King's history has really rounded out my understanding of a lot of his work. It was also amusing that each time Stu asked, Who has read? I put my hand up. Eventually, everyone on the bus asked, Have you read everything? My reply was, As much as I could, yes. That's why I was there, duh. We went well over the time, tried out whoopie pies from the garage, much to the amusement of the locals. Sugar-filled craziness. Such a good day and experience. Thank you for your recommendation. It's a holiday we will remember always. That's great. For me to make that trip, it's, a 4 or 5 hour drive. For someone to fly across the Atlantic to make that's wild. So I'm happy that you did it, Mary, and I think that's fantastic. And Stu, I really enjoyed the tour. That was a really great gift that my wife surprised me with. That was a really good Christmas present, and I really enjoyed our time in Bangor. That was a lot of fun. And the Stephen King tour, again, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about or what Marianne's talking about, there is a Stephen King tour that you can take run by Stu of Stephen King Tours in Bangor. I did a whole episode in which I reviewed the experience, so just go back. It's on the tail end of my 4-part It review, so check it out there. And if you're interested, just check out sktours.com and you won't be disappointed. Up next, we have Johnny, who writes, Hi, Constant Reader. Long days and pleasant nights to you. I've been listening to your podcast for a couple of years as a go-to when I finish a King novel, and I really appreciate your insights. I'm currently rereading the Dark Tower series, and I have just finished Wizard and Glass, and am now halfway through The Wind Through the Keyhole. I've just finished listening to your review and bonus episode on Wizard and Glass, and had a thought about the future of the Dark Tower and the evils within Toadash space. Now, spoilers, guys, for the Dark Tower here, just so you know. Now, I don't want to sound morbid here, but it's something to consider. What if Stephen King has already written his final novel, the one that would close his multiverse and is stored away until even that we all dread as his fans, his death? And what if that novel is the final Dark Tower novel that covers a final quest of Roland and his quartet reaching the tower, and rather than returning to the Mohaine Desert, they in fact manage to save the tower once and for all, cleansing the multiverse and bringing a fitting end to his life's work? Just some thoughts that I need to let out. Would love to hear what you think. Keep up the great work, Johnny. My God. Could you imagine what would happen with the 1-2 punch of... It's a terrible way of putting it, but I'm sorry, but like the emotional meteoric impacts that would hit you if Stephen King passed away and you're dealing with that grief, and then it's announced that based on his final wishes, a long lost secret Dark Tower novel would be released posthumously. That is that is, yes, it is a morbid thought, but it is also one that would be a very impactful topper to his life experience and his work as a writer, and to do that that would be a gift to all the constant readers. I think that it would establish or just cement his legacy as being someone who, since the very beginning, forged a relationship with his fans and wrote with a voice designed for his fans. And then to give one final gift that would be in his wheelhouse for sure. I've never thought of that, but that's a really, really cool thought. Not that nothing is cool about Stephen King passing away. I take that back. That's a really, again, bad way to phrase it. But the idea that there would be a gift there, that is definitely something that is. I would love another Dark Tower book. In some ways, in other ways, I love the ending for what it is. Okay, then we have Michael who writes, I'm a big fan of your podcast. You do a great job. Thank you, Michael. Having a run through all of the book and movie reviews of my personal King favorites, I wanted to make a request that you do the book and movie version of Riding the Bullet. I remember the book release and it creating quite a stir as it was the first mass market ebook. I recall not being very enthused at the idea of downloading a book and reading it on the computer, especially since I don't own it. I didn't own a computer at the time. Consequently, I never actually read it, and I'm not sure if it was ever released as a physical book. I'm curious if that's why you've never reviewed it. I did see the movie on TV and remember it being pretty decent. Of course, that was a long time ago and it could be wrong, haha. Given the release of this book made for a bit of an anomaly in the King bibliography, I thought you might give it a review. Thanks for your time, Mike. So, Mike, I did review it and it was published in physical form within the collection Everything's Eventual. Is that right? It was around that time. But it was released in a short story collection. I did review it if it is Everything's Eventual. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank, but it was in my review of Everything's Eventual Part 2. All of the short story collections. I did a handful of reviews of some of the short stories, and then a couple years later I went back and I cleaned it all up, and I reviewed the ones that I didn't read the first time around. So it's there. I don't know if I will be watching the Stephen King or the David Arquette starring adaptation, but if you want my thoughts on the book, which I really enjoyed, you can check out my review if you just go back. And then we have Gabe Rodriguez, who writes, Dear Constant Reader, I hope that you're doing well. I'm really looking forward to your thoughts on It, Chapter 2, which I saw last night, and then re-listened to your original review on Chapter 1. I seem to be in the minority, but I preferred Chapter 2 quite a bit, although I'm actually noticing a pattern. The average film goers who really liked the first movie seem to not like this one as much, whereas die-hard fans of the book, like myself, are appreciating this one a lot more. Overall, while Chapter 2 was far from perfect, I found it to be a strong conclusion to the narrative, as well as a love letter to these characters, and an ending with an emotional depth. It's easier for me to break down my thoughts into bullet points. Not only did I enjoy the Adrian Mellon scene as an opening, but it actually gave me a new appreciation for the chapter. To be honest, I'd never been a huge fan of that chapter in the book, as it felt very tangential, focusing on characters who were never seen again. I only recently found out that Stephen King based the incident on a real-life homophobic hate crime that happened in Bangor in 1984. If you go online and look up the killing of Charlie Howard, it's actually unnerving how accurately King recreated this tragedy in his novel. I thought that the filmmakers, by being so faithful to the book, made the scene very respectful of the real murder, whether intentionally or not. It's also a sad reminder that homophobia and hate crimes are just as much of reality today as they were in the 1980s. Overall, Andy Muschietti dramatized the scene in a way that made me realize something that I guess I never realized when I was reading the book. That what awakens Pennywise from his slumber is not so much the desire to eat Adrian Mellon as it is the vile act of hate itself. Next bullet point. The adult losers are all well reintroduced, with Bill Hader being the MVP in my opinion. The film does an excellent job showing us scenes and each adult with flashbacks of their childhood counterparts, sometimes weaving the transitions seamlessly. The Mrs. Kirsch scene was excellent. It was always one of my favorite scenes from the book. Stephen King's cameo was funny and a nice touch. And I just want to jump in right here. It's been reported that there was a scrapped other cameo of a King family member, that Joe Hill was going to play the young version of that Stephen King character in one of the flashback scenes, but that got cut, and that would have been cute. That would have been fun. I loved the homage to John Carpenter's The Thing, the sequence with Stan's disembodied head growing legs. While the book fan in me was sad that Audra and Tom had their roles greatly reduced, the film goer in me had to admit that he didn't really miss them and that the screenplay worked fine without them. One little nitpick. I don't like that they changed Henry Bauer's death happening at Richie's hands instead of Eddie's. One thing I always loved about the book was how Henry, the most psychotic and violent bully to ever live, would end up being killed by Eddie, the most scrawny and frail of all the children he ever terrorized. This makes Eddie's death later on feel all the more fateful. Pretty much the only thing in the film that I didn't care for was the whole Native American mythology element, which wasn't in the book and felt a little tacked on here. In the book, the entire ritual of Chud is only vaguely explained. Bill first mentions it as some Himalayan ritual he read about in an article, and later Ben suggests the smoke hole ceremony from some Native American tradition, but that's pretty much it. I get for a 2019 audience used to big franchises with epic world building like Marvel and Game of Thrones, the filmmakers felt a need to add more world building to their lore, but what they came up with never really added to anything. What I like most about Chapter 2 is the way it makes the sewers so much of an environment, much more than Chapter 1 did. The entire climax goes way beyond your typical horror film and enters full-on cosmic horror, H.P. Lovecraft style, with world-bending set pieces. This is the climax that such an epic 27-year spanning story deserves. And for all of the changes they made from the book, I'm glad they kept one of my absolute favorite scenes, Pennywise's heart being physically ripped out and destroyed. I've always loved that and felt that after 1,100 pages of reading about this threat, it's not enough to be told that it's just defeated. It's imperative that you feel the kill physically happen. I also really enjoy that the movie has a nice sentimental ending that says goodbye to all the characters as they go their separate ways. I feel like so many modern horror movies never have strong endings. They just end with a sequel hook or a simple resolution. I like that Chapter 2 goes the extra mile and gives us the story an added emotional gravitas. It earns the right to have a sentimental and even kind of beautiful ending. Overall, I think that Andy Muschietti did a really good job with both of these films, but I felt more catharsis with this second entry. Of course, neither film can compare to the affection that I have for the novel, and likely will always have. Several years from now, I'd love to go back and rewatch Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 as a double feature with a fresh pair of eyes. So I think that's important for me to read emails like the one from Gabe, because he and I saw the same movie, but we saw two wildly different movies. His experience and the way with which he engaged in the movie was much more positive than my experience, and the things that I really didn't like, Gabe seemed to like. And I don't, for my I guess my counter arguments to everything that Gabe says there, you can always listen to my review of It Chapter 2, which I found to be very disappointing. Just I didn't love it. But I'm glad that there are people out there that did, because that's what I wanted from my experience, and I'm glad that some people were able to get that experience. And then up next we have Dustin, who writes, I'm really enjoying the following along with the podcast as I read through King's bibliography. I just finished reading The Colorado Kid, and I noticed couldn't find a review of it. Did I miss it, or did you not review it? If so, why not? I always look forward to following up finishing a novel with the podcast. Keep it up, and thanks. Dustin, you got me. You got me. That's one of my blind spots here. I did not review that novella. It's something that I'm going to get to. I promise you. But it is one of those ones that I purposefully did not do, because I knew that it was one that I would get to later on down the road. So at some point I will get to it. So keep listening to the podcast, because there are some areas I need to clean up. One more email, and then I'll feel pretty good about shrinking my inbox and getting all your thoughts out there. So this is from Martin, who writes in, this is another It Chapter 2 email, who writes, Dear Constant Caster, thanks again for some great content. I hope you and your family are well. I wanted to write to you with some thoughts on It Chapter 2, which I went to see last week. A preface would be to mention that I read It for the first time when I was 12 or 13 in the mid-90s. It left a deep impression on me, and I also really enjoyed the miniseries, with Tim Curry putting a scare in me that lasted all through my adolescence. I very much enjoyed Andy Muschietti's Chapter 1. It wasn't flawless. That's a high bar to set, and I really think so much of it came off so well that I was left with both big expectations as well as trepidation for the second chapter. After all, it's always hard to live up to that first album. And on top of that, I'm part of the chorus of people that think in both the book and miniseries the parts where the protagonists are kids are the most compelling. I'm happy to say that I was happy by what I saw in Chapter 2, mostly, but there are some issues for me that I would like to touch upon. From a technical and conceptual point of view, I think they did a fantastic job. I think Pennywise is wonderful, wonderfully realized, but that was already accomplished in Chapter 1, of course. I also think that most, if not all, of the iconic visual scenes, the fortune cookies, the Paul Bunyan, to name a few, were excellently done. I even think the way they made the final encounter and Pennywise's spider form was very well done. In my opinion, they managed to sidestep folly, and I really enjoyed the ending they gave Pennywise. Now, having said that, I feel a bit shortchanged on how they managed or didn't manage to bring the 6, 7 protagonists to life. This was not an immediate feeling, but one that settled in me after days of mulling over how I felt about the movie. People are complaining that the movie was too long, but I felt not nearly enough time was given to unfold the emotional baggage of the characters and just honestly simple characterization. To me, only a few of them ever felt like real people. We blitzed through where each person was in life. I personally felt like one of the most important and laden scenes could have been when Mike phones up everyone, but I feel that was rushed through. Mike, incidentally, was the character I felt like was the most neglected on this front. Why didn't we spend some time on this very intriguing fact that Mike had opted to stay behind? How was his life? I personally felt like some of the strongest parts of the adult of the story is the tragedy of Mike and Stan. Mike stayed behind as a watchman, losing all of his best friends as well as having to remain in what is essentially a haunted town, and Stan, of course, epitomizing the fact that none of them had ever been able to have children. I could go on, but I think it's best to stop here. I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on this and the movie in general. So that's Martin writing in again. Martin, thank you for writing in. And those were some of the problems that I had as well, which were documented in my review. Okay, so I'm going to put a pin in that for now, because we're about, where are we now? We're about 20 minutes of emails, and there's been a bunch of Stephen King news that I want to address before I get to my review of the Institute. So the latest news is that the Outsider trailer dropped this past week for the HBO adaptation of last year's novel, which came out in the spring of 2018, the Outsider, which is a genre mashup of a nice crime thriller mystery meets a classic Stephen King supernatural horror element. And I was excited about this adaptation as soon as I heard it. I heard that Jason Bateman is executive producing, I believe, starring in, he's going to be directing, and this is also and it's also going to be on HBO. So there's a quality level there that I was really looking forward to, and Ben Mendelsohn is in it, and that guy rules. So there was a little bit of a tease, a little bit of footage in an upcoming HBO kind of sizzle reel that came out back in the summer. And then we got the official trailer, and Twitter blew up very positively around it. It looks sharp. It looks slick. It looks really good. And it's really playing up the True Detective chord. So I think that's going to be able to draw in people that, want to get their True Detective fix, and who might. And I think the people that wanted more supernatural stuff out of their True Detective, I think that you are definitely, you're in luck, because you're going to get that detective mystery, but there is a major significant supernatural presence in the novel. And I wonder how that's, when I actually that's the first time I vocalized this, that there is, with whether it be the Yellow King or the whole just kind of like Lovecraftian edges of the True Detective universe that have been built up by fans but not explicitly stated by the showrunners. There are people that are chomping at the bit to get a bite of crime thriller with supernatural flavoring. And to know that you're about to get that, that's very exciting. I think that this is going to drum up a lot of interest, and just restoke the excitement that that True Detective used to be able to do. And with the book, which I really really enjoyed, and the more I think about The Outsider, the more I enjoyed it. I enjoyed reading it. I was really immersed in it. I was just captivated in it. I know that some people have an issue with there's a shift. There's a definite shift, without spoiling anything, but there is a shift in genre, in tone. Um, it very drastically changes course halfway through the book. I liked that. I liked that decision. I think it was very bold. Some people didn't, and some people say that they like the first half better than the second half. To me, I see it as a whole. I'm fine with it. But I do understand that there is a delineation in the middle of it. I wonder if they're going to follow the same course, and I wonder what people who don't know what's going to happen in this book and who might get drawn into that first half and the quality of the first half and what the reality of the world is that's built into the first half, how they're going to feel when that shift happens and the second half becomes a new thing. I don't know. It will be interesting. I'm very excited to see what film Twitter will be saying about it and what the buzz online is going to be. But this is definitely something to look forward to in that sludgy dredge of winter post Christmas. I am beginning to loathe January. March always was the longest month, but at least with March you're close. You're so close to spring, and it's getting a little bit lighter. It's getting a little bit warmer. You can see the hint of hope, but January, my God, January. I mean, it's when everyone takes all of the lights down off of the trees, and the celebration that lit up the darkness of that's present during Christmas time. It's gone, and then all of a sudden everything is just dark, and it's cold, and you have nothing to look forward to. I do not like January, and so I'm very excited that we are going to be getting something for me to look forward to in January. The Outsider, a feel-good story about crime that you didn't commit. I'm really looking forward to it. Jason Bateman, by the way, is great casting for that role. That could not be more perfect. He is the greatest Stephen King protagonist actor type that has never been cast in a Stephen King role until now. Do you know what I mean? Like, he just really fits that Stephen King protagonist vibe. And Ben Mendelsohn as the detective, he's definitely described differently in the book physically, but you get Ben Mendelsohn in a role, and that dude just knows how to bring it. So, Outsider, I'm really, really looking forward to it. And really cool about it is I almost gave the name of this character. I'm not going to name this character because it is a surprise. But I'll say that there is a character who will go nameless right now, but those of you who have read the book know what I'm talking about. It's really exciting that this particular character has just become a late career memorable character for Stephen King. And now we have seen this character in more than one adaptations, which is just really, really neat. So I know that King loves this character. I know that audiences love this character, and I'm interested to see what this character come alive in another format on another show. So that's great. It's great all around. It's a win-win, and it's something to look forward to. Okay, speaking of adaptations, and very much in line with what I'll be talking about, I promise at some point during this episode, but The Institute, This will be a TV show developed by David E. Kelly and Jack Bender of Mr. Mercedes fame. I am behind. I'm way behind on Mr. Mercedes, but it is on the AT&T network or whatever. It is a shame that it is on a streaming service that no one subscribes to. If this was on HBO, everyone would be talking about it. If it was on FX, people would be talking about it. If it was on Amazon or Hulu or Netflix, people would be talking about it. But it is somewhere that you just cannot find it. And it's a shame because it is a really well done episode to episode procedural that just follows the life of a great set of characters. And it is not flashy, though the first season did have a remarkable death scene that, again, I do not know how people were not talking about it. It's a show that should be celebrated more, and I, for one, am not doing my part in celebrating it because I haven't watched season 2. And like I said, I'm behind on it, but I look forward to reacquainting myself with it. And all of you should go out and seek it out because you will you'll enjoy it. I mean, Brendan Gleeson as Bill Hodges is fantastic, and longtime listeners know how I feel about Mr. Mercedes the book. But whatever feelings I have towards Mr. Mercedes the book cannot be applied to the series, as I think the series is something fantastic. And a lot of that has to do with the performances and the David E. Kelly and Jack Bender of it all. David E. Kelly doesn't know how to make a bad show. So it looks good. It just has. He just knows how to make a solid 60 minutes of television. And Jack Bender is one of the greatest working television directors of all time. So there's just a lot of talent on screen and behind the scenes. So I strongly recommend you checking it out. And maybe they will do for Mr. Mercedes what they also did for The Institute. And that is a tease for what's going to become later on this episode when I review The Institute. Also, breaking news, a Skarsgård will play a Stephen King villain in an adaptation of one of his most beloved books. And it is not It Chapter 3. It is Alexander Skarsgård who will be playing the walking dude himself, Randall Flagg, in the CBS All Access miniseries of The Stand. So this was not casting that I expected. It's not one that I really would have picked, but what Skarsgård... It's crazy that the Skarsgård kids now have claim to fame that they both have played the most iconic Stephen King villain. But what Alexander Skarsgård has is that charm that Randall Flagg needs to possess, and he has a mania. He can turn on this mania in his eyes, and when he flashes the smile, and there's just that insanity that's lurking in his eyes, that he has that. So if you have seen, I mean, he camps it up in True Blood, but if you have seen Big Little Lies, he's monstrous. And he has that charm and that monstrous nature that I think will lend itself very, very well to The Stand. Again, not my first pick, but I have no doubt that he will be able to bring this character to life. He's good. He's really, really good. And he will do well as Randall Flagg, for sure. What else? There's been some other casting. Stu Redman. No, not Stu Redman, but Greg Kinnear has been confirmed as, which, it's different, not what I would expect, but Kinnear is really good. I like Greg Kinnear. And I can see him playing that character. And, Whoopi Goldberg has been cast as Mother Abigail. So the names... Heather Graham has just been cast as Rita Blakemore, who was not in the 90s ABC miniseries. This is a character that book fans will know. She played a pivotal role in Larry's the beginning of his journey, both emotional and physical journey on his way out of New York. And I think that, again, not who I would expect, but I can see why they would cast her. And I think, again, I think that Heather Graham is great, and I think that she will do a lot with that particular role. Okay, what else do we have? We have Castle Rock season 2 coming out this next week, which is a strange mashup of Salem's Lot stuff with Misery stuff. Whoever would have thought that was a combination that would ever work? We'll find out. With some, Sundog, Needful Things a little bit, with some Stand By Me stuff coming in. We have Tim Robbins of Shawshank Redemption fame coming back to play Pop Merrill, who was the old kind of huckster, gangster, heavy, who didn't appear much but had been referenced frequently and was in the Sundog and kind of was a led the way for Leland Gaunt in some ways to come into town. So what's interesting here is that season 1 established that this particular version of Castle Rock that operated on its own version of the tower, if that's how we want to reference it, existed in a world where needful things had occurred. So, but I assume that this is taking place post season 1, and there's a Pop Merrill who, if that's the case, Pop Merrill existed prior to Needful Things, which occurred in before season 1. So we're getting, of course, just I don't know how much of a stickler you should be when you go into this, because this is not, you should not, I am not going into this thinking that this is a prequel for Annie Wilkes, that this is just a different interpretation of the Annie Wilkes character that's operating again on another level of the tower. So the Annie Wilkes story that we have in Misery is its own thing, and this is a what if story. What if Annie Wilkes, before she became the Annie Wilkes that you know, wound up going to Castle Rock simultaneously as Ace Merrill was involved, Pop Merrill was involved, and something was going on in Salem's Lot. So there's a lot. It's a big stew of a story that is playing with more explicit Stephen King characters than we had gotten from season 1, where we got Alan Pangborn. But now we're getting Pop, we're getting Ace, we're getting Annie, we're getting I don't know if there's any more, and we're getting the Marston house. So it will be interesting. I'm looking forward to it. I enjoyed my time with season 1. I enjoyed my interview with Dustin Thomason, so I'm rooting for Dustin and Sam Shaw. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to review week by week, just with the time. I would love to, guys, but I will definitely give my thoughts on it one way or another during the season 2, whether it's a kind of wrap-up review at the end or like a midpoint check-in or a week by week. I don't know. We'll see what happens. So Castle Rock season 2 is coming. What else? So I have not had a chance to pick up Full Throttle yet, the short stories by Joe Hill, but I'm really looking forward to reading that. I think I'm probably going to hold off until November and just really sit down during Thanksgiving time, that little break of time that we have Thanksgiving weekend. I would love to just build a fire in the fireplace, pour a glass of wine, and just sit on the couch and read. I don't know why I'm building that up in my mind, but it's a checkpoint that I want to just sit and read during that weekend, and that would be the book for me to do it. So maybe I'll get to it before then, but if not, that's kind of when you should expect the review of that. So if you haven't bought it yet, you should, because when it comes to short stories, Joe Hill knows how to craft a fantastic short story, and I'm really looking forward to it. I believe it includes the collaboration between he and Stephen King with In the Tall Grass, which had been released prior to this. It was downloadable, and In the Tall Grass was just released on Netflix as an adaptation. I was going to review it. I'm not going to rewatch that movie to review it. I don't think the novella is incredibly potent. It is a surreal, dangerous, dark, icky, sticky, suspenseful, surreal, emotionally draining reading experience that gets under your skin. It sticks on you. It is powerful. It is really, really well done. It is a fantastic read. Is Lynchian at times. It is Lovecraftian at times. It reminds me of 1408 in that, in just how it gets into your head. To me, the movie does not do any of that. It has a hammy, wonderful performance by Patrick Wilson, who just comes in out of the grass in a completely different movie. And when he goes camp, it is fun to watch. Like his performance in Insidious 2 is a lot of fun. And he kind of brings that same level of energy here, where he's just having a great time. And anybody that's a fan of Creedence Clearwater Revival might get a kick out of what he's doing in this role. But honestly, it is a bunch of people running through the grass, screaming each other's names for 90 minutes. And what works in the book to me does not translate into the audiovisual medium. People might disagree. I know that Vincenzo Natali has a track record. He did Cube in the 90s, which was it's a cult classic. He did Splice about 10 years ago. So he knows how to bring it. I was looking forward to it, and I was disappointed. I did not enjoy it. Like I said, the things that I thought worked really, really well about the book just he wasn't able to recreate those sensations in the movie, which was unfortunate. So that was In the Tall Grass. Okay, everybody. Now it is time for me to discuss the Institute. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give my general final thoughts at the end of the review, and I'll get into the Stephen Kingisms and the Easter eggs. But leading up to that, as I read, I didn't take as much thorough notes as I normally do. Honestly, I just wanted to read it, and I wanted to enjoy it without really applying those analytical eyes that I used to with the majority of the books reviewed in the Stephen King cast. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to get my thoughts as I go along. It's just I'm going to give some bulleted sequential events of the novel to just orient ourselves as we go along, and then I'll get into a more in-depth examination of my thoughts on the book. So, like I normally say, this gives us the foundation upon which I can build my analysis. It's just a little bit different. So, Chapter 1, it starts off with Chapter 1, Night Knocker. Okay, and that is an alluring title, one that I had never heard. And so, I want to know what a night knocker is. It doesn't quite set the stage because it isn't a major part of the plot. It services the character of Tim, and the role that he will play in shaping this town and bringing this town together. That sets up a major part of the conclusion of the book. So if we didn't get him as a night knocker, then Luke at the end of the book wouldn't be able to be victorious against the Institute. But let me get to that later. So this character that we're first introduced to, Tim, it's a type of character work that signifies King's strengths. We get to know him very, very well through action, through a little bit of exposition around his life, getting off of the plane and then hitchhiking his way to this small little town. He's presented as a very likable lead, very much in the realm of Stephen King protagonists, as we have seen before. And in fact, the kind of rambling nature that we see him as being presented, it reminded me very much so of Barbie from Under the Dome, and this kind of outsider, not like the outsider, but this outsider coming into town and meshing with the town itself. It really brought back some Under the Dome vibes. Okay, so that all of that is the Night Knocker, and this first section of the novel. It's interesting because I don't know. King spends so much time having us get to know this character and the town that he's going to make his home, and then we don't see it again for hundreds of pages, to the point where I wondered if we were ever going to get back, and if it was just some. I didn't. It's weird. We don't check back in. It's a weird way to start this, rather than starting with Luke and then getting all of the Institute, and then when Luke escapes, I can see then establishing this town. It is just strange how he decided to structure this. I don't have really a problem with it. I just found it a little odd, the way that he decided to go about it. All in all, I thought it was a really good beginning of the book. One of the highlights. And I'm gonna spoil my overall thoughts on the book, but I don't think the rest of the novel lives up to the promise presented in Chapter 1, The Night Knocker. That was where my interest in the book spiked, and I just don't think that anything from this point forward actually lived up to my hype of the novel. Okay, Chapter 2, The Smart Kid. And this is what I'm talking about. It feels like it's a different novel. It feels like he had almost two ideas. He had this image of the Night Knocker and this man who's kind of a roamer and who had some setbacks in life and is finding a second chance in this town, and starts to bring out the best in this town and becomes an important part of this town through these nightly, just making people safe at night and being a part of an older way of life. I think that was an idea that he had for one story, and then he had an idea for another story. Okay, and then he smashed them together, and I just don't think that it was really successful. I rather would have seen some sort of investigation with the Night Knocker character. I would like to see what would happen if the Tim character became embroiled in some sort of supernatural or town-based mystery. And that would be one book, and I'd like to see another book about the Institute. But to put the two together, though I always like when a quartet forms, as we will see later in this book, I just don't know if this was a successful smashing of two different stories. So I just spoke earlier in this podcast about how much I liked The Outsider for it being almost two novels put together. And here we go. We have another example in which late day Stephen King very, very clearly establishes two different stories. And I do want to state that in The Outsider, he doesn't do this from a plot perspective as drastically. It's almost two genres in The Outsider. Here, it is two different stories. It is interesting that this is a pattern that is establishing in his works in his later years, to some success in some ways and less successful, I think, in this case. But to get with this particular chapter, The Smart Kid, in retrospect, I like it less. At the time, I was fine with this
it's kind of hard reboot already within the book because it's disorienting and it's creating a large world in the world of the Institute, and I think that is important. There's a sprawling sense and a danger within the sprawling. So in the Night Knocker chapter, the darkness feels it's palpable. All right, and he is this lone character of security and safety, and I feel safe being around that character, even though the darkness itself is so oppressing. And then here with the smart kid, I just sensed him being within that darkness and the dangers that lurked within that darkness. I felt that there was danger around him at all times. So King is always successful at being able to do that. And I do admire how well he is able to create this all-encompassing dread and this sprawling world that's going to play heavily into the latter half of the book. So what we get here is we get another supernaturally gifted Stephen King youth, and I will talk about that later in the book, or later in this review, in Stephen Kingisms, because clearly this is not the first time that we have seen him craft a character that is a child that is supernaturally gifted in some way or another. Here we have a character that has low-level telekinetic ability, and I'll get to the fact that it is low-level as opposed to some of the more some of the characters that are massively superpowered. We don't really get that. The Charlie McGee level, or even the Danny Torrance. This is a different flair. But what he does is that he shows how different this character is because he is a genius. I'm going to get to this later about how effective this is, or in this case, how ineffective it is. There are times in which Luke is his genius does show how different he is as a person and how difficult it must be for him to exist in a world of non-geniuses. But there's also times he just feels like a Stephen King kid. I'm gonna get to that later. But right now in this book, the purpose of this chapter is to establish that he is a genius, that he does not function in normal schools. He is going to a gifted school that they can't even service him because he is so much of a genius, and he's going to have to go to college at like age 12. All of that is amazing. Let's see that character. Again, I don't think that King lives up to the promise of this particular character. I think he might have bit off a little bit more than he could chew with what he was able to create with such potential, with a character with so much potential of intellect. But this is what he's establishing now. And so he creates this genius character with loving parents who want to support him, and it's all undone with the abduction by the characters from the Institute. So another writer would write this scene differently. After the fact, we might see the crime scene with the police and neighbors who are shook, or maybe we'd see it, take place in the house as the father wakes up. But King turns the scene on its head by keeping the focus on the abductors. And what King does really, really well, that I have really appreciated since doing this podcast and rereading all of his books, is he does not romanticize, he does not glorify villainy. He makes it so matter-of-fact and blue-collar and day-to-day and kind of dumb. And that, to me, makes it more horrific. And these are just people doing their job, and they're doing horrific things with their job, and to them it's just their job. And we see this being played out, I think, more transparently than ever. I'm going to get political. So I know that that pisses some people off, but Stephen King is a political person. He's always been a political person. Even though this book is not, I'm going to say it right now, the book when he wrote it, he didn't write it with the inspiration of the immigrant children being detained. There are parallels, but that was not the genesis of the novel. Um, but he does have his thoughts about that, and so anyway, make a long story short, there are those that are in power that are making very inhumane decisions, and it's very matter of fact. And we do see that type of mentality taking place within the scene with these characters who are murdering parents, abducting children, and it's so matter of fact. And King does this by keeping the focus on these characters. We get to know them. They're not. They don't seem to be monsters. They're just flawed human beings doing a job. It reminds me of what he did in with the True Knot. These were like horrible people that were abducting children, killing children, torturing children, but the perspective was not shown from the outside. It was shown from within. We saw them for who they were by living in their heads and getting to know their fears and their interests and their hopes and their dreams and their perspective. And similarly with Peemly Prentice, King completely subverted all expectations, and everything that he had established of the monsters working for the Crimson King over the years. Once the Crimson King was introduced in Insomnia, by the time we reach Book 7 of the Dark Tower, and we start to see more of the inner workings of the monarchy, whatever you want to call it, of the Crimson King, those that work for him, it's not some Sauron-ish orcs, Nazgul, faceless evil of just like Frank Frazetta, art inspired of just like demons that rise up from the earth and are just inherently evil. No, there is a blue collar nature and a daily grind of the job, and limited knowledge and limited empathy and limited emotional skills of the characters that are doing some horrific work. And he continues this here with the Black Ops team that go in and take the kid. Okay, and then from Luke's perspective, he wakes up in a windowless room, and it's creepy because everything is just wrong. It's his bedroom, but it's not his bedroom, and King does this scene very, very well. And he goes into the hallway and he meets the first of the characters that we'll get to know living in the Institute, and that's Kalisha. So all in all, Chapter 2, The Smart Kid, it's a very effective introduction to this character and to the threat of the novel, the conflict of the novel. It's an effective introduction to Kalisha, to Luke, to the Institute, and it sets up just this poor kid who is equipped with all of this intellect, but right now is not, in fact, his intellect, which was supposed to be some amazing gift that was going to give back to the world and give back to his family and launch him into a beautiful life, has now been ripped, and the dream has now turned into a nightmare. And he does that very, very well. Okay, Chapter 3, we get Shots for Dots. We meet Nikki, the other kids, some of the staff, and we begin to explore the grounds of the Institute. So we start to get that, what King does very well. He starts to detail everything very, very well. So we feel he's so successful in creating this, the setting, that I feel that I'm there. We get Gladys, the smiling guide, who tells him that his life is now meant to serve. And this whole operation feels very reminiscent of Dinky Earnshaw in Everything's Eventual. So the world that Dinky was living in, and the organization in some ways that was very similar to the Institute, is very similar here, in terms of service, and how his employment of the organization in Everything's Eventual, and the state of living in Algel Ciento in The Dark Tower, it's very similar to this. King likes to explore the ideas of the villains being able to trap the characters and the victims with perks of gifts and comfort. And so the fact that they can eat basically whatever they want. As kids, they can smoke and drink. There is a, it's like it's a Pinocchio-ish kind of fairy tale, right? And it's dark and it's depressing, and being trapped with freedom is something that is I like King being able to do that. It's very disorienting, and it really makes me vulnerable as a reader. So, in all of this, and I'm really speeding through this, I acknowledge that. In all of this, in all of the experiments that Luke starts to go through, the shots for dots, which, though King mentions it often as he mentions it, it's never fully clearly explained. I think he thinks it is. And I don't think that I'm misreading here. I just don't think that, and King has always been good about being able to visualize very abstract or strange concepts. The warehouse of the mind in Dreamcatcher, the externalization of the voices of Jesse's head in Gerald's game, in the Dogen of the mind that takes place in Song of Susanna. And he's really, the Deadlights, as abstract as that is, and the Macroverse, all of that, he is really good at taking things that just don't make sense and being able to have them make sense, which was why I'm so disappointed in shots for dots. Oh, there's a Stephen King catchphrase. I did not include that in the Stephen King-isms, but that definitely is. So that's a little taste of what's to come. So when I get to the Stephen King-isms, and if I forget to say shots for dots, I'm calling it out now. There's another Stephen King catchphrase that he likes. I just, at no point is it ever truly, like, it is explained, but I just don't think it really makes a lot of sense. It's said a lot, and, they wind up seeing the dots and they see the swirls, but I don't know. It's just kind of there. It's kind of like there was a lot of ideas in Dreamcatcher that kind of didn't add up to anything, and I feel that a lot of the same stuff is occurring within this novel, with the ins and the outs of the testing and what's occurring in the Institute. I just don't think it's as clear. I mean, there's going to be a lot of parallels between this and Firestarter. I think that what he does very well in Firestarter and does less well here is that the rules of the world, the rules of the powers, the goals of the villainous organization, it's all very clear in Firestarter. It is less clear here. In some ways it works, because in Firestarter there are good guys and there are bad guys, and that is less clear in the Institute, and that is more reflective of a realistic world that we find ourselves living in, and I fully acknowledge that. But at some level, in terms of plot construction and the concepts that are occurring within the novel, I think that it is a disservice, that things are not as clear as they could be. And shots for dots, and the dots, the Stasi, the Stasi dots, I believe they're called. That is something that I think it's a disservice that it is not as clear as it could be. So in all the experimentation, something changes in his brain, and Luke manages to keep it a secret that he's now a telepath, not just a telekinetic. And this becomes the source of tension, because it's a good one. Now that he has a newfound power, that power is also a danger to him, because they're looking for this, and they don't know that they've done something to him, and how long he can keep it a secret. That is just something that I don't know if King even knows what he's doing. Or if it just comes out instinctively, that he's able to build in these ticking bombs that create the suspense, that not only do we have a character whose parents were murdered and he was abducted and he wants to get out, and but now there's and his friends are being taken to another part of the more mysterious of the mysterious facilities. He has this section where he now has a power that he needs to keep quiet. It's masterful storytelling. This is why he is the king. Nikki is taken, Kalisha is taken, and then he's able to find a back door to the computer. He outsmarts the computer, and he discovers that his parents were murdered. And it's sad, and I like the introduction of the computer, how it's his glimpse into the outside world. I'll get to this again. I think the potential is never truly fulfilled to its maximum potential with the fact that he has this tool that he's hiding. There is no payoff of it one way or another. He uses it to help another character. It shows what it does is that it is less of an active plot point or character trait that he's able to use this tool to his advantage. It more from a passive standpoint shows how lax the Institute had become in their security. And the function of the computer is to illustrate to Luke how lax it has been and gives him the resolve that he needs to take the chance to escape, because that was an unmonitored computer. Okay? What I rather would have seen is him from within bring about the ruination of the Institute, or somehow be able to use the computer to acquire the skills that he would need to become a hacker in order to hack the system, in order to cause trouble, in order to send out word. That could cause tension. But no, the function of the computer is to show that the Institute, as its own character, grew sloppy, and that Luke is able to take advantage of that sloppiness. So the computer does function into the plot. It does function into the escape that eventually occurs, but not at the maximization of Luke's skills, not as a weapon that Luke uses against the Institute. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay. Then we have the chapter Escape. Luke begins to lay low and use the weapons that he has with him, his intellect and his powers. He's remaining patient. He's taking in as much information as he can about the place, the people within him. He's beginning to explore the different levels after gaining everyone's trust, because they think that they have broken him in. So it's a good surveillance section and just acquisition of knowledge section. More is revealed about the back half and the purpose of the Institute. The children are being forced to psychically assassinate people of interest. Okay, so here we go. This is very much in the style of other Stephen King books that we have seen, in which children are being held against their will and their psychic powers are being weaponized. We've seen this before. It's a well-worn Stephen King trope that I'll get to later, but here it's important that in this novel we get the truth as to what is occurring. Okay. The next mystery is introduced as Avery suggests that there's something very wrong within the back half, that there is an ominous droning hum. And so again, that King just knows how to build the tension that not only is there a back half, not only do we know that Luke needs to escape, that he's going to try and escape at some point, we just don't know how. Like he's trying to hold in this other ability that he has. Now there is this ominous droning hum, and that something is very, very wrong with this place. What is it going to be? Is it going to be a door to a multiverse? Is it going to be some supernatural creature? Is it what's it going to be? To me, it was very reminiscent of Cell with the hives of the zombies. and how they were, all synced up, and they were like just a pack and a hive mind. The first time I heard that hum, that's where my mind went. That it was something very similar in nature. Um, and then we get the water tank torture scene. We see just how strong Luke is, in terms of emotional resiliency and physical resiliency. He doesn't break. He endures the torture. It's a hard scene. It's done very, very well. The villains are monstrous, with their coldness and their justification of the tortures that they inflict upon these children, because it's the job. And I already discussed that, but this is very much on display here. And then Maureen assists him in getting out. The scene is very tense. It's very tense. It's very well done. I have some issues with it, because my issues with it come from the fact that Luke is not the originator of this plan. He is not the generator of his own escape. He escapes because someone else created a plan for him. And for someone that is a genius, and I'll get into this, to me, it's disappointing. I'm not sure about the ice scooper. Like, I would have liked a little bit more of imagination. But I mean, with all that said, him having to cut off his earlobe, oh God, it's gruesome. It's like the gloving scene from Gerald's Game. All the way through the woods, down to the trail, into the river. I mean, the escape in the boat, it's a beautiful moment. It really is. It is cathartic. It is wonderful. And despite the fact that at this point in the book, I didn't find that I couldn't wait to read. I don't want to say it was a chore. It's never a chore. But when I read The Outsider, I read Elevation in just one sitting. It's so short. But The Outsider, when I was reading The Outsider, when I wasn't reading The Outsider, I couldn't wait to get back to The Outsider. And that's when Stephen King's at his best. For me, my relationship with The Institute, I wasn't counting the minutes of getting back to the book. There was just a lot of repetition in the scenes within the Institute, that I felt I've seen before, that are a bit repetitive, and redundant. And to me, I don't think that King was really adding too much newness to it. But with that said, whatever issues I might have had within the Institute, Luke's escape is very, very well done, and all of those emotional highs are hit, and it's soaring. It's wonderful. We get the train ride to Sturbridge, Massachusetts, and then we're off to DuPont. So we're heading back to the location that started it all. Okay, and then we start with the chapter of Hell is Waiting. We start to get to the science of it all, which I think is incredibly important, on page 283. Okay, so as train 4297 was leaving Portsmouth, New Hampshire yard bound for Sturbridge, Mrs. Sigsbee was studying the files and the BDNF levels of two children who would shortly be residing at the Institute. One was male, one was female. Ruby Red Team would be bringing them later in that evening. The boy, a 10-year-old from Sault Ste. Marie, was just 80 on the BDNF scale. The girl, a 14-year-old from Chicago, was an 86. According to the file, she was autistic. That would make her difficult both for staff and the other residents. If she had been below 80, they might have passed on her, but 86 was an outstanding score. BDNF stood for Brain-Derived Neurotrophic Factor. Mrs. Sigsbee understood very little of its chemical underpinnings. That was Dr. Hendrick's bailiwick, but she understood the basics. Like BMR, basal metabolic rate, BDNF was a scale. What it measured was the growth and survival rate of neurons throughout the body, and especially in the brain. Those few with high BDNF readings, not even 0.5% of the population, were the luckiest people in the world. Hendricks said that they were what God had intended when he made human beings. They were rarely affected by memory loss, depression, or neuropathic pain. They rarely suffered from obesity and the extreme malnutrition that afflicted anorexics and bulimics. They socialized well with others, were apt to stop trouble rather than start it. They had low susceptibility to neuroses like obsessive compulsive disorder, and they had high verbal skills. They got few headaches and almost never suffered from migraines. Their cholesterol stayed low no matter what they ate. They did not tend to have below average or poor sleep cycles, but compensated for this by napping rather than taking sleeping aids. While not fragile, BDNF could be damaged, sometimes catastrophically. The most common cause was what Hendricks called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE for short. As far as Mrs. Sigsbee could tell, that came down to plain old head-banging concussion. Average BDNF was 60 units per milliliter. Football players who'd been in the game 10 years or more usually measured in the mid-30s, sometimes in the 20s. BDNF declines slowly with normal aging, much faster with those suffering from Alzheimer's. None of this mattered to Mrs. Sigsbee, who was tasked only with getting results, and over her years at the Institute, results had been good. What mattered to her, to the Institute, and to those who funded the Institute and had kept it a hard secret since 1955 was that children with high BDNF levels came up with certain psychic abilities as part of the package, TK, TP, or in rare cases a combination of the two. The children themselves didn't know about these abilities because these talents were usually latent. Those who did know, usually high-functioning TPs like Avery Dixon, were sometimes able to use their talents when it seemed useful to do so, but ignored them all the rest of the time. Almost all the newborns were tested for BDNF. Children such of the two whose files Mrs. Sigsbee was now reading were flagged, followed, and eventually taken. Their low-level psychic abilities were refined and enhanced. According to Dr. Hendricks, those talents could also be expanded, TK added to TP and vice versa, although such expansion did not affect the Institute's mission in the slightest. The occasional success he'd had with the pinks he was given as guinea pigs would never be written up. She was sure Donkey Kong mourned that, even though he knew that the publication in any medical journal would land him a maximum security prison instead of winning him a Nobel Prize. So this was an important and necessary scene. This sets up the chapter with Mrs. Sigsbee. It's and who we had been introduced to a couple times, and before we get to spend time with her as a character, I was writing her off as kind of a throwaway Stephen King villain. But once we get to know her and get to see her tick, you know, he just did the Stephen King thing where he's able to take the concept of a character and imbue that character with, with a life and her ambitions and you just get to know her, and he does it very, very well. But I found that this was incredibly important for a couple of reasons. One, we get to know the antagonist, and two, we get to know the science and the why behind why all of this is occurring. And it's thrilling because from the get-go, when the scene starts, this chapter is called Hell is Waiting. Boom. Here we go. New perspective through Sigsbee's eyes. Maureen is found dead. There is disorientation within the leaders of the Institute, within this branch of the Institute, this particular location. And there is doubt and there is concern that is starting to grow. It's a wake-up call to Mrs. Sigsbee, who realizes that things had gotten sloppy under her care. And like I said, until this point, I was checking out. I would put the book down, I would grab my phone, I would surf the web. I just wasn't rushing to pick up the book. This was a much-needed shot in the arm for me. The inner workings of the Institute, all of this, just the monotony of it all. I thought that it was incredibly well done. I thought it was incredibly important. And then we get, scenes like this. Life here was good enough anyway, especially for men and women who'd eaten sand in the Mideast and seen fellow soldiers lying in shitty villages with their legs blown off or their guts hanging out. You get the occasional furlough. You could go home and spend time with your family, assuming you had one. Many Institute employees did not. Of course, you couldn't talk to them about what you did, and after a while, they, the wives, the husband, and the children, would realize that it was the job that mattered, not them, because it took you over. Your life became, in descending order, the Institute, the village, and the town of Denison River Bend, with its 3 bars, one featuring live country music. And once the realization set in, the wedding ring would more often than not come off, as Alverson's had done. So you get the sense of what life is like. We have seen what life is like for the main character. Or not the main character, but the Tim character as the Night Knocker. We saw what life was like for Luke within the Institute, and now we see what life is like for the employees of the Institute. So King is giving this all-encompassing look at life. And then we get the growing sense of unease as Sigsbee and Stackhouse head towards the back half. Gladys finds the trench, the realization that one of the kids is missing. Avery is then tortured. One of the kids betrays the plan, which is awful. And then, Luke meets a friendly stranger on the train, and the kindness of the stranger allows him to continue to escape as the Institute starts to circle and chase and follow him. So even though he's out in the world, he's almost less safe now than he was before. So all of this is really, really good. And then he winds up in DuPont, and he meets Tim. So again, it goes back. We're, now like 300 something pages into the book, revisiting a location and a character that almost felt like a dream from another novel. Okay, and then we get Hell is Here. The Institute prepares to descend upon this small town. And then back at the Institute, Avery is dunked in the tank and brought to the back half. But something is different, much like it had with Luke. Something has now been unlocked within Avery. And then during this section, King is able to make an abstract concept concrete. And this is what I was talking about before. He's an absolute master of this in most cases. He spends the time to have Avery remember the time the previous Christmas when he received a Lego set and began to cry at the thought of putting it together. He had the pieces but didn't know how they went together. King does this for 2 reasons. One, because it shows just how tragic and sad Avery's life now is, and more importantly, gives us the metaphor for the groupthink that will occur when he goes to the back half. The others will mentally help him with the pieces to form the proverbial Lego castle. And that's why King is great at that. As the Institute goons begin to descend upon the town, the back half kids finally take charge, forming a circle and powering up. King undercuts the rising triumph of the back half kids getting revenge on their captors with the terrible truth of the function of the Institute. Its operation ensures the continued survival of the world itself. It's a great gut punch that comes at the right moment. Rather than giving us the good, triumphing evil, like I said earlier, this novel is not about good versus evil. There are no clear good guys versus bad guys. The bad guys are tasked with survival of the world. It's kind of a good thing, and this is a case of the end justifying the means. It's awful. It's awful, and these children are pawns in a great game that is designed to keep the game going. And so he's really playing with our emotions at this point. And the story at this point is escalating for me. And for me, what had been at times a chore to get through, this is where it becomes impossible to put down. The Institute kids first make their escape, doling out revenge, only to get trapped when the retrieval team has a good old-fashioned shootout. It's wonderfully orchestrated by King, which results with our good guys becoming the victor due to the community protecting its own. So the villainous pragmatism of Sigsbee is really put on display here, and it's very cathartic for Luke. I'm very happy to see, so we get the Institute juxtaposed against this small town. So everyone in the Institute, huddles together to work towards the nefarious means, and then everyone in the small town works together to protect their own. And their own is anyone that wants to be part of this town, which I think is beautiful, So I mean, it's Tim working with this town, it's this town working with him, and they're all circling around this child who is going to be taken again. And I really like the idea of a community taking this outsider child, and rather than surrendering this child to the villainous forces in the world, they make this child their own, and they do what they can to help him. I think that is a wonderful thing to read about in 2019. So, after the blowout, King swivels the triumph by introducing a gut-churning compromise that Luke would make a deal with Stackhouse. And then we have the chapter Big Phone. So until now, I'd been pretty frustrated, and I'll get to this, and upon the conclusion, I am still frustrated with the depiction of Luke's genius or lack thereof. But there's a little bit of a payoff here. I don't think that really adds up to everything, but there is a payoff that shows his tactical mind working. So on page 471, Tim wanted quiet for Luke, who was now the brains of the operation. He knew most people would think him nuts for allowing a 12-year-old to create a strategy intended to save the kids in that tunnel without getting killed themselves. But he noticed that Wendy was also keeping quiet. She and Tim knew what Luke had done to get here. They had seen him in operation since, and they understood. What exactly was that understanding? Why, that aside from having a yard of guts, the kid also happened to be a genuine bottled-in Bond genius. These Institute thugs had taken him to obtain a talent that was a little more than a parlor trick. They considered his brilliance a mere adjunct to what they were really after, making them like poachers willing to slaughter a 12,000-pound elephant to get 90 pounds of ivory. I love that description. Tim doubted if Evans could appreciate the irony, but he guessed Sigsbee could if she ever allowed the idea mental house room that was a clandestine operation that had lasted for decades, brought down by the very thing they had considered dispensable, this child's formidable intellect. It's a fantastic build-up. I don't think that we ever really get the payoff to that. But I was so excited. When that occurred. I don't think that King is able to really pay off the buildup of Luke's brilliance. Okay, and then we get some really cool visuals here, and some just good cathartic moments. Sigsbee dies. We see the front half rising into the sky as all the kids, working together are able to telekinetically lift it into there and then throw it onto the ground. It's cool. It's great. Again, I don't know if this really adds up to Luke's brilliance, as their plan is to drive the car into the Institute, but with Sigsbee in the front. And the big plan is to have Luke and Tim lay down in the back as the car is riddled with bullet holes. That's not a master plan to me. Sorry. And then we get the lisping man. It's a purposefully anticlimactic conversation with the man with the lisp about precogs and unreliability, and can they take the chance on the world ending if they have this system in place that does ensure that the world continues, even though there is variability and unreliability that doesn't fully justify the existence of the Institute. So I do like that question is posed there. And then one by one, they say goodbye. And then we have King writing the conclusion here. Tim almost let him go, then changed his mind. He caught up with Luke and took him by the shoulder. When the boy turned, Tim hugged him. He had hugged Nicky. Hell, he had hugged them all, sometimes after they awoke from bad dreams. But this one meant more. This one meant the world, at least to Tim. He wanted to tell Luke that he was brave, maybe the bravest kid ever outside of a boy's adventure book. He wanted to tell Luke that he was strong and decent and his folks would be proud of him. He wanted to tell Luke that he loved him. But there were no words, and maybe no need of them, or telepathy. Sometimes a hug was telepathy. Remember when I used to read the most important excerpt from the text? That to me, that functions as that. I think that that's a beautiful summation of everything that King was working with in this book. You had characters who would murder family bonds, like he had written. They would slaughter an elephant for the tusks, right? And here he concludes it with the formation of a new family, and the importance of just the celebration, the physical need for contact, and how everything was going to be okay, and putting the humanity above the supernatural powers, or the sci-fi powers here, whereas the Institute had, stripped its own humanity in pursuit of gaining the side effects of the powers and being able to weaponize them. So I think that is a very nice and very humanistic conclusion to this story. Okay, let me get to my final thoughts here. So here, when it comes to the Institute, let me, okay. So I guess the best way to put it is this. Okay, we have seen kidnapped or locked up children before with Firestarter, with the Talisman, with the Suddenite Gardener section, with the Dark Tower, with, like I said, Everything's Eventual, with Black House, with Wolves of the Kala. Okay, we have seen this before. We have seen Escape from Prisons before, Shawshank, The Green Mile. We have had scores of supernatural children or superpowered children. Carrie, Firestarter, The Talisman, Dreamcatcher, The Shining, Dr. Sleep, The Dark Tower, Black House, The Langoliers, The Regulators. We have had stories of resilient, tough-as-nails children. Talisman, Salem's Lot, The Gunslinger, It, The Body, Desperation, The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, Dr. Sleep. I say all of this because we have seen everything that King gives us in the Institute, but we've seen it done better. Here, it's less. It's a lesser version in so many ways than what we have seen before. If King had not written Firestarter, The Dark Tower, The Talisman, Shawshank, Green Mile, Carrie, Firestarter, The Talisman, The Shining, Dr. Sleep, Black House, The Langoliers, The Regulators, Tom Gordon. If he hadn't done all of that before, this would be great. But the problem is that he has done it all before, and the beats that we get, the characters that we get, the plot points that we get, the villains that we get, the heroes that we get, they are lesser versions of better stories that we have received from Stephen King, unfortunately. And in some of these stories that we've gotten, the biggest point of comparison I would say is Firestarter. We have a character whose power level was so great there was the threat that it could literally crack the world in half. Here we get characters who don't even know that they have powers, and the powers that they have, he can knock a pizza box off of a desk. It's a decision that he makes, right? To really place it more in a grounded reality. It is less fantastic than some of his stories, which is a choice, and I don't mind it, but it is a choice that once he makes, is gonna be put up to critique because so many of his novels are fantastic, and he has been able to blend something so fantastical with reality. He's always been able to ground everything in reality. That is his strength. So you get Charlie McGee, who was able to literally set the world on fire. And this girl was such an incredible power set, so vulnerable. At no point does she ever feel safe, or does she ever feel in charge or in control. right? So we get the most powerful, supernatural, I guess you want to call it, this the charged kid, who also feels the most in danger at all times. And then conversely, here we have Luke, who he's not even the most powered of the kids in this book, and he's just as vulnerable. So that juxtaposition of powerful and powerless, I've seen it done better in other King books. And this, when I had heard that this book was coming and super powered children were going to be taken, I first thought, oh, is this some sort of backdoor sequel to Firestarter? It very well could have butted up against events of Firestarter, and I'm fine with it not being a sequel to Firestarter. That's okay. That's okay. And now that he has presented this, I'm glad that he made the decision for the Institute to not be the shop. And I had read an interview in which, when he first conceived it, it was gonna be the shop. But I'm glad that it's not, because this exists in its own level of the multiverse. This is a story that is taking place where the events of Firestarter did not happen, or the psychic powers that are occurring here they're such low level that we don't have the Dinky Earnshaws. We don't have anyone that's able to flip into other territories. We don't have the Shining. We don't have these very raw and powerful abilities. We don't have Carrie White. Carrie White single-handedly could raise the Institute to the ground. And then here we have a bunch of kids who are barely able to lift the building into the sky, and not even be able to affect the characters of the Institute, because if the bad guys know that they might be psychically under assault, that is enough to be able to prevent the kids from being to inflict psychic damage upon them. Contrast that with Andy McGee, who, it doesn't matter if you know it's coming or not. Before his mind bursts, he is able to have you do whatever he wants you to do. So this is all to say that Stephen King made a choice. And it is very similar in some regards to his books. It is very different in regards to other books. And I'm glad that, seeing as how he made the decision to keep things so low level, that he did not include the shop, because that would not have felt consistent with what he had created with other superpowered children, as they had, prior to this, always been presented as more powerful. And also, it's not just redundant or repetitive or something that we've seen before within Stephen King. We've just seen it. If Stephen King didn't write this, I would have thought that this was just someone just watched the first season of Stranger Things and wanted to throw their hat in the ring of this evil organization abducting children, right? It feels very, Hawkins Lab, abducting 11 and working on the children, which is the snake eating its own tail, right? Because that in of itself, feels very similar to what King, even though that is, based on the Montauk experiments and everything. But that is very the shop and Firestarter. And here, this seems to be kind of a carbon copy of what Stranger Things had done. But with all that said, the last 200 pages are pure adrenaline. The scenes intercutting back and forth from the Institute to Dupre ratchet up the tension until the novel just simply explodes. It is good. It's well done. I have issues with the book, but when King is on and King wants us to feel tension, he knows how to do it. But going back to what I had said about Luke, why create this genius child and not have his genius intellect a part of the escape or the ruination of the Institute is beyond me. Honestly, the manner with which he was constructed, it wasn't dissimilar from other Stephen King children, whether it be Mark Petrie of Salem's Lot or Jack Sawyer from The Talisman. But both are well equipped with resolve and intellect, but they're not the level of genius that Luke is presented as. And I can't tell the difference. Luke's brilliance is not a factor in his escape. The sympathy derived from an employee based on his involvement in her financial affairs is. You might argue that had he not surfed the web to inform himself about debt is an example of his genius, but I would disagree. It's just an example of someone's ability to surf the web. The application of the knowledge that he is able to absorb and the knowledge that he already possesses is what I was looking for. That would have been more interesting if Luke had already possessed the debt information. It would have shown that for this woman, such information was of monumental importance. But for Luke, it was just something that he had picked up one Saturday afternoon when he was bored. Honestly, all he does with that computer is just Google. That's not a sign of genius. That's just a sign of living in 2019. I think that either, King could have made him a typical King kid, one with psychic powers, which is your typical King kid, or make him a genius. But what King does is make him a genius who acts no different from your typical King kid. And in fact, when you stack him up against the other King kids, he's actually less than most of them. But my final thought here is the fact that the survival of our heroes occurs because they're able to get help from the townspeople, and townspeople who own the guns, enough to distract the Institute team who had come to retrieve Luke. This could not have happened if Tim haven't been in town, and because of Tim's gentle conversations and interest in the people of the town, holding off the man's suicidal thoughts long enough for him to give our heroes a fighting chance. It's a beautiful illustration on King's part, showcasing the importance and the power of human connection in a time that we need it the most. Okay, Stephen Kingisms. Straightening paintings in hotel rooms. Tim does this. And of course, this is something that was a character trait of Roland Deschain, given to us in the first Gunslinger. Creepy nautical paintings. Okay, in 1408, in Dumaki and here. Brilliant children. I've already talked about this. Catchphrase. Oh, I already mentioned it. Shots for dots. I did include it. Outdated references. This is a more recent Kingism, but it's one to note. He refers to cool kids as having backwards baseball hats and rock band t-shirts. He refers to teenage smokers as goth kids who listen to Pantera. One of the rooms is decked out in Rugrats posters and G.I. Joes. It is not applicable. These references to character traits are not applicable to 2019. Unfunny Stephen King joke. Just don't call her sport. Here's a Stephen Kingism. The staff member of an organization. The cleaning. The maintenance. The cleaning lady, cleaning man, staff member of an organization dedicated towards the imprisonment of a superpowered people who befriends the main character but is secretly in on it. That was seen before by John Rainbird in Firestarter. A child running cross country on a train. That has been seen before. Imprisonment and escape. We've seen that in Shawshank. Empowered children being used up. That's very Root from Wolves of the Kala. Here they are the Gorks. Approaching vans of doom. When the vans in this book are coming for the small town. It's very, it invokes the vans in the Regulators. Okay, we have some Easter eggs. Gerda and Greta were standing with wide, frightened eyes. They were holding hands and clutching dolls as identical as they were. They reminded Luke of twins in some old horror movie.
And that old horror movie would be Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, which famously Stephen King has hated, but it appears that recently his stance has softened a little bit. Part of it may have to do with the fact that back in the 90s, in order for him to get his ABC TV miniseries made to tell a story that was more in line with his vision, he had to agree to stop bad-mouthing Stanley Kubrick. Or maybe just the fact that he was able to get his version out there in the ABC TV miniseries, he kind of has relented on some of the bad feelings that he had. because he's in interviews around Dr. Sleep, he had discussed how the Dr. Sleep gets to honor Kubrick's vision, which is not something that you'd really expect from an earlier King. But anyway, this Gerda and Greta, the way that they were standing, is a shout out to Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Harold Cross. This, to me, could very much be a little shout out to the combo of Harold Lauder and Nadine Cross, two characters whose lives were intertwined in the pages of The Stand. Then you have a character by the name of George Allman hosting a conspiracy show about supernatural activity called The Outsiders. Well, look at that, The Outsiders. And then we have Salem's Lot. Salem's Lot. Turns out George Allman talked about the mysterious disappearance of the townspeople of Salem's Lot. And you can find many episodes about Salem's Lot earlier in this podcast feed. So that's all that I have for the Institute, everyone. Hope that you enjoyed it. If you have any thoughts on the Institute, please write into stephenkingcast@yahoo.com. You can follow me on Facebook, Blue Sky, TikTok, and on Instagram. And if you have any time on your hands, please leaving a review on any of the podcast platforms that you use to listen to the Stephen King Cast would be greatly appreciated. It would help me out a lot. All right, everyone, so that's all that I have. May you have long days and pleasant nights, and I will see you here next time, where MOON spells Stephen King Cast.